Process. That is the value of the model. And I'm struggling to understand what the timeline of it, I think, as much as you or anybody else is, right? In when is the right moment to pose the kind of question. And partially the challenge is that those are Dr. Engel's interpretations, right? And we're not in the position to provide the interpretation because we would just be duplicating our policies, right? Presumably our policies are relatively clear. And so as we're going through all of these, especially the info sessions and things, that first time with each OE or whatever we're hearing about, I'm looking carefully at the wording of Dr. Engel's interpretations to see, like, does that actually line up with the way I'm interpreting this? And if I have those moments of, no, that doesn't mean what I think you think it means, right? Inconceivable, and there's that moment. That's where I think the opportunity arises. But then that is just the start of, like you're saying, this months-long process, which I see you roll your eyes, and I don't think you're wrong to do so, because it is a little unnatural, like I said, right? I don't necessarily see it as being unnecessarily complicated. I see it as a potentially valuable, like I said, insulation. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, your point about we don't reinterpret what the superintendent's interpretation is because that'd be our policy. I mean, to be honest with you, I think our policies are pretty well written. We have a super smart superintendent. I don't know.
I would argue potentially, like in the monitoring reports, it indicates the policy. Then it has superintendent's interpretation. I've read the book, so I know why that's in there. However, it's basically just us regurgitating the policy using different words.
Yeah.
So I don't know that particular interpretation is something I would worry about. I don't know that it's something that we necessarily focus on. What I'm focused on is what is the indicator and evidence that we can provide to the board that meets their intent. So OE3 is a pretty straightforward one. Superintendent will protect confidential information. That is very straightforward. And so that's the board's expectation, that's the value. Got it. We don't need to reinterpret protect confidential information. There's not enough words to create synonyms for. And so then our job, because the board expects that, is to prove to the board and the community that we've done that. And so our job as administrators who are in the weeds is, like, what are some indicators? Like, what are some things that would make sense to demonstrate that we have protected confidential information? And on a year-to-year basis, the actual evidence we're able to provide might be different. Oh, we've got a new security program. We've got a new protocol over here. Like, here's the different things we can show to prove that. And so I think the monitoring process, in light of like a simple one like that, is very obvious to me. I have to demonstrate to the board that we have protected confidential information. I don't need to reinterpret that. That's clear to me. And the evidence is different every year. Potentially. It's likely the same every year, because it's pretty straightforward. And then I think every year, there's an opportunity for the board to say, like, those are okay indicators. I thought they did well, but cybersecurity is really something that we want to focus on and is an issue. Have you thought about an indicator for cybersecurity? The next time you bring back a monitoring report, we would like you to consider that before we approve that monitoring report. And then we go back, we do some homework, we bring that back for approval, and the board says, yeah, that's what we wanted. we had agreed as a board that cybersecurity is something we need evidence of. Administration said, we'll find that indicator, we come back, then the next year we have that evidence for it. And so I agree, like the process, we can get hung up on the process, but I think the concept's pretty good. Here's our value and expectation. Administration provides evidence. Do we need to change this for next year? Yes, no, all right, here's your expectation for next year. All right, we're all set. And there's an opportunity to change the policy in there too, if the board feels it's necessary, it's not working for the board anymore. So I think like, for me conceptually, pretty simple process. 2 months later, you're like, okay, like which step are we on?
Right.
You know, and trying to use 2 meetings to demonstrate that we're being thoughtful about stuff. And, you know, all of that kind of gets in the weeds of the Robert's Rules of Order. But I think the concept is the board said, we need this done. And our job is to say, we prove it's done. And, you know, I think the board reports that the board got under policy governance were fine. They certainly weren't as extensive. I think to Annie's point, like the reports we provide now demonstrate, I think, unequivocally to the public that we are doing due diligence. And when the board is able to vote up or down on those, you can feel confident you've got all the evidence you need to support that. You know, and if you don't, we've heard it. And we've been asked in the past to find more evidence or to report things differently. So that's my interpretation. I definitely understand like the confusion around some of it, but I think the concept is great.
Yeah, I think also one of our issues that has recurred at least a few times in our meetings in the opening session of each OE or result has been that backward looking nature of it, right? And that even if we're looking for another indicator, we're still looking at approving the way things are now, right? So there's that tension between what are we looking at from the past and does it satisfy what's in front of us in the moment? That can be, we can say yay on that, and also we want to look at something different for the future. And I think that's where maybe some of us are getting a little lost, and I think myself included in that, right? I don't want to speak for anybody else. Where, like, where's that moment? Like, take cybersecurity, right? Let's say there's some new innovation. Like we touched like really briefly on ChatGPT in one discussion a while back, right? And is that something we actually want to? Is it a matter of having our policies explicitly address doing something around AI, keeping track of if students are engaging with it or whatever it is we want to do? Or is that something that we can say, what's already written here is capacious enough to cover that. We want you to come up with an indicator specific to AI.
Yeah.
Does that,
Yeah, and I think,
right? Am I understanding the process?
yeah, absolutely. The board says like, hey, this is a new thing, and we need to make sure that we're on top of it. We need evidence.
Right.
Because it's concerning to our public to ensure that we're on top of this. And so the board votes, you know, and collectively says, yeah, we need an indicator on that. And so administration says, absolutely.
And that happens, we bring it up in meeting 1.
Yep.
We vote on it in meeting 2.
You could bring it up in meeting 2 also.
And we vote on it in the next
Like,
meeting. Right.
if, so, I guess the way it's been going is we're talking about the past in the first meeting. We're looking at the report that's proving to us that all these policies were followed.
Right.
Here's the proof. Through that, board members have brought up different things, like, well, I want to see lit, you know, this thing, or I want to see it like this. And although that doesn't affect their decisions about the past,
Right.
Aaron then makes notes, and those end up in the next template approval. At the template approval time, you could still be like, make a motion to add, an amendment that would
I think
include
that
this
template
indicator.
approval, so like, that's kind of new terminology to me. And where
So
does
the
that come
template
into?
is the monitoring report,
Indicators.
Indicate,
yes.
okay.
So I don't know, maybe template is my word, maybe it was in the book, I don't know. But basically,
I think I do remember
it's
that.
what the district will use throughout the year.
Going
right?
forward.
And then using those indicators in the template next time prove to us that those things were met.
So like in the process where the board says protect confidential information, What we're doing is, the administration is saying, hey, for this next year, this is what we're gonna be looking for as indicators to prove to you that we're protecting confidential information. And then the board is saying, yeah, sounds good. Or like, no, we need something on cybersecurity. Can you add an indicator? You need to add an indicator for that for us to feel satisfied that you're protecting confidential information. And so then we add that, and then the board
Yeah.
says, okay, if after a year you show us information on these indicators, we think we'll be pretty happy about where things are at.
Also, if we get a monitoring report that's telling us about, improving the past, even if all of the indicators have evidence attached that mostly meets those indicator, whatever stated, if there was something going on in the district, like some big safety violation, we still can say, I don't care about these indicators and the evidence you've given, we just had this big thing happen, tell me what's going on.
Okay.
And
Prove
so
to
we
me
don't
that
have
you've done
to
the
just
right
be
thing.
robots that are like, you
Right.
gave data, we agree. We can also use our thinking brains and say, what happened here and why is this, we
Okay.
didn't know in the past that this was coming, or we needed
Right.
to know what you were doing around these things.
Now, that's a
There are-
really useful
there are fires all
hypothetical,
the time.
but I think it's an extreme one though, right? Because like it's tough for me to imagine a meeting in which something big has happened, right? Something potentially tragic or traumatic to some of our students, especially around safety, right? And that you wouldn't be bringing that up as part of our regular meeting agenda, right?
Potentially. Let's say that we got crypto locked, right? And we're held ransomed for $1 million to get our social security numbers back. And we're engaged in that process.
Yeah.
It probably will happen, but let's say that it happens. It's happened in plenty of schools. And we get to the report, and we said protect confidential information. And our indicators from the past, didn't really address this sort of issue. And we didn't, on our own, bring it up. The board might say, like, that's fine, you did what you were supposed to on those indicators. And certainly we've been made aware of this security issue through some emails, but this is a really big deal for our community. You need to provide evidence that this won't happen again, or you've done everything you can to prevent it. And we need a new indicator in the future on top of that that addresses this. So not only are we not accepting your report right now as it's written, you need to come back with something next month. Also, we're going to change the indicator for next year because this is an important value for our community to protect our kids' social security numbers.
Doesn't that hinge on the crypto lock hypothetical happening at the time we're already reviewing this
We
on
can call a meeting, if there's an event like that, and it's like months in the future that we would assess that, we can say, bring us
Yeah.
some
We're going to monitor
information.
that now.
Right.
Protect confidential information.
Generally,
Like, did we do the right thing?
when things are going,
Right.
according to plan,
So-
we don't want to call something up to address just because we have a pet thing we want to do.
Right, that would be
But
a
if
pretty
there's an
big-
event
Right,
or a need, we can ask the district,
right.
ask
Because
the
so many of these
administration to do
reports they're the representation of like weeks of work on like Dr. Lahecki's part, for example, right?
Mhm.
Like, so we
But-
can bring something up and say, you need to bring us some information, but if it's like, if that happened on like the Thursday before our meeting, like,
I would also say if it happened
Reasonable, I guess.
5 months ago, and you got updates along the way, and you were in the know, and
Yeah.
we kept you updated, and then we get to this report, protect confidential information, it's like, hold on a minute, we just had this huge thing, and you're
Right.
not gonna provide any evidence that we didn't protect confidential information, or we need to do something different here.
so we would want to see you owning what happened, right? Not to say that we expect that, you'll be able to prevent every
No,
incident, like that just can't
Things
happen. Right.
happen.
Yeah.
But that,
And-
we always will want to see acknowledgement of those kinds of things as a part of our regular reporting structure, in their timing within the work plan.
Mm-hmm.
And like, if something really arises, so that 5-month timeline, right?
Yeah.
It happens 5 months ahead of time. We know this is coming up, and we have and we've talked about it, and we know the kinds of things we want to see. Immediately after the event, we probably want to have some address of that in our
Yeah.
meeting to start that process of saying, we're gonna need you to report on this.
You need to address
When
OE
this
3.1,
policy comes
protect
due.
confidential information. We're gonna remonitor that right now to see what the response has been and what's going on. because this involves our kids and our community, we want active participation as a board right now to see if we're doing the right thing. This rises to that level of that value, that policy. And we have to demonstrate, in that process that we're doing the right thing. And then the board will hear what we're doing and you'll be reassured. And then later on, you'll be like, we had that huge thing and you didn't even put it as an indicator? That's insane. Fix it.
This feels really reactive to me instead of proactive, like our policy should be. If something like that happened, you would send out, I think of the Central Fire.
Yeah.
You sent out emails on it, you let us know what's going on
Absolutely.
it, you keep us updated regularly. I'm sure someday when we get to report on the facilities, you'll mention that happened, you're gonna have all the things that are in place now to remedy that. Like, I don't envision that we would get a report that something really big happened, and we as a board said, you've got to do something about it, without you as administration saying, oh, that was bad, but we've already got this, and this in place, and working on this, and this other thing to make sure this never happens again. I'm confident administration would do that without the board breathing a word.
Right.
For sure.
So that feels,
Sure.
I just don't envision that ever happening. Like, you guys are on top, like every administration's on top of that.
And I don't want to call it performative, because I believe we are, and I appreciate that confidence. But sometimes the board needs to address things publicly for the benefit of the public. Even if administration's doing a bunch of stuff, there needs to be like I don't want to call it like a hearing or something, but like, hey, let's have a conversation about what we are doing. And so if all of our kids' personal information is held hostage, and our teachers, and like, maybe we need to address that at a board meeting. What's the vehicle for doing that? Our policy monitoring
Right.
process. OE 3.1, we're going to monitor that, have a discussion about how we're handling this issue. And so yes, we're doing the right things. Our administrators are working hard and tirelessly. We've got everything in hand, and we're reassuring the public as well. But there may be a place for the board to say, like, yes, our administration's doing this, but we take this seriously too. And this is our vehicle for saying, we're going to ensure that things are on the right path. Publicly stating to the public, and potentially providing an opportunity for public comment and those other things that reassures people that the board cares at their level. We heard some complaint about that over this last year. Is the board as active on some of these things as they ought to be on public issues? This is the vehicle to show that you are as concerned as people want you to be through this process.
And I think in those big situations, like the fire, like this hypothetical crypto hack, right? The only option there is for reaction from the board, because our policies are proactively stated, right? The superintendent will protect confidential information, which is not ever to say that it can't happen, right? That those things won't arise. But so in those severe instances, we're always going to be reacting. Or maybe I'm misunderstanding what you were saying about it being reactive.
Like, the only time that we can bring something back is, like, the way I was understanding this discussion is if something big like that happened, and then we as a board would say, hey, because we'd wait till something big happened, and then we would say, hey, we need this, that, or we need to have a discussion on it. That feels reactive to me. That's what I was referring to.
I see what
as
you're saying.
reactive. Yeah, any crisis is reactive.
Yeah, right. Any crisis is reactive. So maybe we could talk through a situation that is not so much. I mean, there's a new tech development or something that's not a security issue or a safety thing. It's like a learning tool we're interested in that is revolutionizing algebra.
I would say in a traditional board environment that I've worked in, it was very reactive. Our policies were all over the place, dealt with every little bit of minutia, and an issue would come up, and the board had to figure out what their values were on that. So let's say that there's we're having a bus driver shortage or something, and all of a sudden the board's getting involved at that level, and we're trying to figure out what our values are around attracting and retaining people and how much money we're willing to spend on advertising. And that was super reactive, right? And that's the work that traditional
Put
boards
dollar
do.
signs on your values.
Exactly. This process, I think, is super proactive, as was policy governance. I know I have to protect confidential information, and I've already given to the board what I'm going to do to demonstrate that I've done that.
Right.
You already know what I'm looking for this year. And
And as the world changes, what that looks like for you will change.
Exactly.
Right, even though the policy doesn't need to,
Mhm.
right? Because in the bus driver example, right, the problem there was that no policy already existed to cover that. And so whoever the board is at that moment has a discussion to have about that. The hope here, right, is that we've established policies that are broad enough, are comprehensive enough to address most eventualities that are out there, right? And that as board turnover happens, it doesn't require a complete reimagining of our policy structure every time, right?
Yeah.
Now, at the same time, maybe not in terms of the results policies, but in some of the operational expectations, it's not inconceivable that the composition of a given board shifts in terms of its values enough to say, we want to rewrite this. It's not just a matter of the indicators or the interpretation, it's what we're actually asking for in
Yes.
the first place,
And I
right?
think,
So it's levels.
yes, and I think what you said about policies needing to be broad to prepare for all of
Right.
the things that could come under facilities,
Right.
right? Like, we can't predict, and it would be ridiculous to expect an administration to go through 100 different policies that we've just added to over time as we like nitpick at the little things that
Right,
come up.
because then an issue arises and you're searching through and cross-indexing policies that connect to each other, and that is the labyrinthine bureaucracy that we want to avoid, right? And I think that's, again, that goes back to what I was saying at first about that being sort of the strength of insulating against rapid change,
Yeah.
right? Not that it prevents change, but that change happens after the experience of maybe not failure, but like inadequacy or lack at different levels of what we're seeing in terms of information. Is the way I'm coming to understand this. I think.
Yeah, I mean, I would think about it too in terms like in a workplace, as an employee at a workplace, not a board member. There are policies that govern how you act or how you treat people. And you know, if I'm thinking of the library, our policies are broad enough to allow staff flexibility to meet the needs in the moment.
Right.
They're not so prescriptive that it's like you must respond in this specific way
Right.
every single time.
Yeah, policy at that level is strategy. It's a general approach to a variety of possible situations. What Aaron does and the administration does day to day is tactics. How are we going to solve this problem right now? Right. Okay.
Yeah, and I think, you know, the protect confidential information, that's a pretty big statement. And then we give you indicators through the monitoring report, hey, here's how we're gonna approach demonstrating that we've done that. And you might say like, that's great, like but you forgot, you know, personal health information, like, we need some security around that too, you know, and that's that's wading into that kind of the administrative side that the board has the opportunity to do so through this process based on the values that you understand from the community as elected representatives. You're like, hey, like this is an issue that has happened in other places. It's obvious to everybody. It's a gap here. You need to add that thing. You know, so I think that's a way for the board to kind of bridge that policy piece into like what you expect to feel comfortable that value has been taken care of.
What do you think
Suspiciously quiet.
about any of this?
This is so far removed from what I do every day, because when we work in the business world, we talk about what we're doing, we're in tactics like they're doing. So for me, it's the frustration I feel is less on the monitoring reports and the process. It's more on how can we be extra helpful to the administration and use our positions within the community and our networks to help drive communication or drive goals, or you know, that is the parts that I feel like that I get frustrated with being on this board. Is I do like to be involved. I'm a doer, I'm a strategist, and not being able to utilize those skills is frustrating for me.
Yeah, oversight is a little different.
Yeah.
Approach. I
So-
agree. Yeah.
So that's been my frustration. Like, it's not the process. The process I knew was going to be weird. It's different. It's very, very different. You know, Robert's rules or something I haven't done since college, since being in a fraternity. Like, I knew that part was going to be a little awkward for me, but for me, I agree with the reactionary comment. Like a lot of my notes when I go through and I read the reports is a lot of the indicators and everything is a lot of our verbiage and even our policies a lot of time are around reactionary wording. Where I feel like the more proactive we can be, and again, I don't know because I'm not in the weeds and I'm not expecting to be in the weeds, but how can we make some of our policies feel more proactive to the community and to ourselves to make sure we're equipping the administration with, you know, proper understanding of like what we think should be happening at a really high level. That's the part I've been struggling with is there even a way to do that? In your comment last meeting about are we getting the right information, are the indicators, or is everything set correctly where we feel like it's not just data, because we live in an academic environment. That's what I feel like this is. It's a very academic environment. You know, data is data. And I live in data every day, but it's financial data. It's how do I make data points to understand is our strategy working? Are we moving the right indicators from a business to move ourselves forward? That part doesn't bother me, but I feel like sometimes we get stuck talking about data more than we really talk about, is this the right things and what does this mean? What does this data mean to the community? Right? You know, interpreting that data to somebody that is working 3 jobs, trying to make it work and say, all right, I feel comfortable. Like this is a good place for my kids. This is good. This data means something to the people that pulled it, and it means a lot of hard work that the people are doing within the district. But what does it actually interpret to, in layman's terms, to most people?
I think there's an opportunity in the cover sheet or whatever it's called in the beginning, where the general report that we receive where all the data is presented is kind of summarized in a way that it's like, this is what you're going to see, it means this sort of a thing. We haven't like spent a ton of time on that, and that could be more robust, where we say, I mean, if we're talking academic, just like an abstract, like
A little more
these are the
narrative,
findings, you know, this is what data we pulled, this is what we're thinking it means. And then you get into the presentation, we've read that summary abstract, and then in the presentation we have the opportunity to be like, that data looks weird to me, why is it like this? I see that you say it means this, but I question that.
Yeah.
Is that kind of, do you think an approach like that would help those concerns about data just being data without meaning?
Yeah, I think having some sort of a synopsis of here's why we feel this data is supporting these indicators.
The warrant there.
Correct.
Yeah,
This is why we chose these as indicator, and that to me, I would still want to dig into the data as here, but as a community member, if I got that data report and I'm actively involved or passively involved, but there's a hot topic that I want to make sure that I'm monitoring.
Right.
I can look at that and say, all right, here's what they're saying. If I really want to dig into the data, I can dig into it. But
So-
just having that interpretation as to what that data is telling me.
So the audience, I'm thinking all the time with the monitoring reports, is the board.
Yep.
Maybe in that abstract summary, you approach it less as like, our indicators say blah, 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 but like the public is the audience, and it's more like,
I think
This
that
is
would
the
also
state
help us though
of-
too.
yeah.
Because I think back to one of our first meetings with the new board, when we were looking at civic engagement. And my question was, are we just counting the number of times a student did a thing, or are we looking at the quality of those experiences? Now, that is also a bad example because, as Dr. Lahaki said, that's super hard to measure the quality, right? And we're not there yet. We don't have a way to do that. Some of this is very new. But that's the kind of question you're getting at, right? Is like not just is the number there. We can have confidence that the numbers are being reported accurately, right? Are the numbers the right thing, right? Or is it the right numbers, or is it the right? Should it be qualitative instead of quantitative? And if we need to develop more robust qualitative metrics, that's a problem to take through the administration and through those experts in those areas, right?
I really appreciate your comments. I think that's part of where I'm struggling. when I went out and got signatures to get on this board, I heard more negative comments about the district in general than I'd ever heard when I'd been on the board before. And that bothers me to no end, because we are the district of choice. Like, we're awesome. Like, it shouldn't be, we should be hearing great things from the public, not negative things. And so I feel like my job here is to help change that narrative. And again, how do we do that? And I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but when former board member Abrams left, and part of his reason for leaving was policy, it created, like, the public had no idea, still doesn't really know what our policies are, but there's still a buzz out there that there's something wrong with the school board policies. And so I want to really be transparent so that we can change that narrative and get that trust back, and get people saying what we know about this district, that it's a great district, and saying the positive things about the district, the administration, the board, our students, and all that we do here.
I would go back. I really appreciated in one of our meetings, Katie had a good comment that in many cases, like when people say like there's something wrong with the policy, I think there is a disconnect, and she said something to the effect of, I doubt most people could name a single policy that they could point to and say that one's a problem.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a really fair response. At the same time, I'm not saying you're wrong about this. I'm saying that I think in the public perception of that, there's something wrong with the policy, that they're wrong about what the problem is. They're thinking it's a matter of policy, but it's a matter of something else.
Mhm.
And finding that
That's
something
fair.
else and addressing it is something that we can and ought to do. I certainly think that. So.
I think it's also important to note that there's a general feeling in the country among certain groups that public education is bad or doing worse, or there's some, it's part of a culture war in certain groups, and it's for people who exist in a media environment where they're consuming media that is pushing agendas like that. It doesn't matter what's happening locally. If that is a repeat message that they receive, they may be like primed to be angry about something. We also just came out of COVID, where everything was made extra difficult. And I feel like in my conversations with the public, that has been, it's like there was a before that was better, and now we're in the after, and it's not as good. And it seems like that COVID line is the line.
I think that's just goes back to the in general feelings of the public. So you feel it no matter what layer you are, what job you do, if you're tired, if you're not. So many factors have impacted your life negatively in the past few years, and your stress levels are up. I think that goes back to it's super critical for us to tell every positive story we can to make sure the perception, everything we see when we're having groups come in. And I understand, I think we were talking about the community school program or whatever, and we were talking our way through that, and I asked the question, are we talking about this? And their concern was, we don't want to feel like we're utilizing underprivileged communities to make ourselves sound better.
Mm-hmm.
I get that. That's a perceptual thing that we have to work our way through, but it's a really powerful story on the way that we're not only just impacting the educational trajectory of our children, but the community at large on top of it. Those are stories we have to tell.
Absolutely.
And that's the part that I feel like we as board members can help without, and be an extension of the district.
Yeah.
And you'd be a powerful voice for those types of things. But how do we do that? And it goes back to, I think, the communication plan we were talking about. To me, it's just a concerted PR marketing campaign. That has to happen. We have to tell those stories, because that's the only way we're going to get around people's perceptions of what they think we're doing, to get to the meat and bones of what our educators and our staff are doing every day to make impact on our kids.
And this, we're diving into the weeds here, and I can relate this. Nick and I have been talking about how to reach groups that maybe haven't been reached before as well as we'd like. We did a community survey. We asked people what their preferred communication methods were for our connected to school community, families, teachers, students, people that are associated, they prefer Facebook, email, direct messaging, that sort of thing. We do that well. For our community that is not connected to school, elderly, younger people, one of the things that arose for them at the top was print sent to their homes. And so we're looking at that, like what is the cost to send a biannual mailer that highlights the great work we're doing and also provides key information at key times about registration, enrollment, free and reduced lunch stuff, that key information. It comes at a cost, and fortunately with the modern targeted mailing systems, we don't need to send it to everyone. We can actually identify the group that said we prefer mail as opposed to Facebook. And so we can ensure that certain groups of people get that thing as opposed to others, cut our costs down, and be really targeted about that strategy. So that's an example of how we're reacting to that need, kind of at the administrative level. And in the report that we provide next year, there'll be evidence, that we saw this data, we're choosing this strategy, and it'll be a part of an indicator. Feels reactive, right? The board wasn't involved in that conversation, but it's something that we do as good administrators to look at that and make some decisions around it. And I hope that is evidence enough for folks. It is. In a defense of us, and just kind of looking through these indicators in some cases, the superintendent will inform the board of anticipated significant media coverage. Indicator there is pretty simple, like, did we provide you information of anticipated significant media coverage? I don't know what that is, but reactive, and to say, like, here's a autopsy of this last 12 months, and did we do that? Yes or no? And along the way, we would hear complaints, if there was not, I assume, and so there's an opportunity to address that in the moment as well, so we hope we're not just flapping our wings. We are demonstrating progress towards these things, and I think those indicators are where the board can decide, is this actually evidence that we're meeting the policy? And if not, we're happy to change those indicators and present different data and even remonitor in a short period of time. If the board looks at it and says, looks like you were very process oriented but not outcome oriented, what actually happened, we need to see something different, we can take 2 weeks and come back. That's not a problem. So we're totally open to what that looks like. I would simply say that I like the process. I think it's more transparent. I think it provides a ton of information to the board. It's super proactive. The board tells us these are our values and we approve of what you're going to show us for next year. I think it's a great process. Easy to get hung up on like which meeting are we doing what, and that's going to be confusing, I think, regardless. I do like your thoughts about like proactive stuff, and it gets to almost what Deb, you were talking about in terms of like what's the purposes of linkages to kind of like reaffirm or address our values. Having some sort of like proactive workshop on a topic of public interest would help understand the topic better and maybe reaffirm or shift values that could inform policy. It would show the board's actively working on something that the public's interested in with the intent of potentially affecting policy, maybe not. Might reaffirm exactly what's going on. But it would also be like, hey, these are the 4 policy elements we're going to cover this year that we're super interested in getting public feedback on. We're going to have a workshop. We're going to learn all about it, invite some public in to like learn more, and then we're going to see if that informs our policy at all this year. And it might not. And it might.
It's not impossible to imagine a situation, like going back to the linkages and finding those different ways of engaging community. I'm really glad that we were having that discussion last time, and I hope that we continue to, because it's not difficult to imagine a situation where a particular stakeholder group, say teachers, right, are experiencing a new situation in their professional life, right? So we talked about crypto hacker or some big safety thing that people would be aware of. Well, what if it's something that only teachers are aware of, right? How otherwise are they going to get that information to us? It's going to filter up through the administration, maybe, depending on what the channels are. But by having opportunities to do linkages and bring that like to the forefront, maybe there's something that is not currently addressed by policy, right? Or maybe it is, but we don't have an indicator speaking to it. So I'm seeing then that there are multiple ways that this change can happen, right? If change is desirable, is necessary for whatever reason, there's multiple pathways for it to like come before the attention of the body, I think.
It just hasn't happened while I've been here. You know what I
And
mean?
that's the thing,
There
is you
hasn't
remember
been,
the
like,
negative, right?
a crisis thing where it's been like, well, we gotta call them in for this.
Right.
You know, like, thank God.
Mhm.
But I don't think that coherent governance is so rigid that it would prevent us from responding to like an immediate concern or need that's
Sure.
emerged.
Right.
And I think the only thing that would like limit how we address something would be the open meetings law. And 24 hours notice is the
Right.
minimum needed to notify the public on an agenda item. So
2
if there
hours
was
for an emergency.
2 hours for an emergency. So
Right.
if something came up that day, we
Yeah.
all had to come in, we could.
Mhm.
Do we want to look at individual policies? Jeff says no. Deb, do you? I know Trevor does.
I wanted to shift the conversation to one specific thing just to get some input on, because I'm kind of coming around to the idea that wordsmithing here isn't so much what I need to be paying attention to, because I've read all the policies at this point several times in most cases, and I haven't found a single policy where I've said that's a bad policy or even that's poorly written, right? Except and this isn't necessarily a thing where it's poorly written. I'm going back to OE 3. You were talking about protecting confidential information. I'm looking at the sort of the ambiguity or the squidginess in number 2, effectively handle complaints. That is written in such a way where your interpretation has a wider range of possibility than I think it does for number 1. Protecting confidential information is relatively straightforward as an idea. Effectively handling a complaint could mean really different things to Aaron and myself, right? Does it mean we have a value of resolving, is our policy, I hate to use the word to define kind of the word here, is our policy to resolve things in favor of the parents, the teachers, whoever it is that's been giving the complaint? Or is that a procedural concern that we have a transparent, a fair process in place? Like, that's where I look at the language and I wonder, is that the problem, or are we interested in what the indicators are? And as we've been discussing this, I see more room on the indicator side to resolve my potential concerns with that language. But I just wanted to highlight that one.
For history,
Yeah.
a lot of our old policies were kind of we didn't invent all of them when that was created. And so that was already in there. And of our old policies, effective handle complaints is from the language. So a lot of the language in our policies has been around for a long time. And
Right.
so that's been there for a long time. I think your question's great, though. I never thought of it before. But why it's written like that, it's just always been written
Right.
like that.
The other thing about the complaints, and this comes up like, I think every year, is what is a complaint? Like you get an email, somebody's
Right.
mad. Is that a complaint that's recorded? And then like how you resolved that? And then there was questions in the past about like, it's an official complaint, so how does something become official? And there's different processes, and I can't remember if there's other policies that also kind of address this. I feel like within the learning environment one, there might be something about complaints, because there is a monitoring report that comes forward about complaints specifically. And often
I
we
don't
get.
think we've seen that yet.
I don't think
No.
so. We often get a letter that says like, there were no complaints.
Right.
Which, if you're a board member and you're checking your email, you'll hear complaints.
Right.
But they're not official complaints. And that
Right.
has
We've
been a
had
question.
public speakers come expressing concern,
I
which,
had probably 15 complaints today via email, and
Right.
many I resolved as a matter of my course of my duties. Our principals get 100 complaints a day, and
Right.
they deal with those on an ongoing, like, our whole job is complaints.
Right.
It's rarely gratitude, right? So like that is like, then it depends on like what you define as a complaint, which is what we do in the monitoring report. You know, and then we define it as formal complaints, and then, you know, have we had any formal complaints? You know, often, no. Like, people didn't fill out the paperwork, even though we direct them to it, make it widely available. Like, we should address complaints at the lowest level possible. You know, a teacher is like, Sally keeps hitting my kid, like, that needs to stop. And they go talk to the teacher, and they're like, oh yeah, they do. We're gonna change the seating arrangement, and this is what I'm gonna do to ensure that ends. And then maybe they still hitting their kid at recess, and they go to the principal, and the teacher says, like, they didn't stop hitting my kid, it's still a problem. And the principal's, all right, well, we're gonna rearrange the monitors at recess, and we're gonna ensure that, you know, there's better supervision here, I'm so sorry, like, we're gonna make sure that stops. And then on the bus, the kid's still getting hit, and they go to the director of elementary ed, and it's like, my kid's still getting hit, like wherever they're at, they're getting hit. And so then we go talk to the bus company, and we rearrange assigned seating, and we assign a monitor for that bus for a period of time to reinforce positive behavior. And then their kid's getting hit at the basketball game because they interact with that kid there, and then they come to the superintendent, and they're like, my kid's been hit everywhere they go, and the school won't do anything about it. And I'm like, oh my gosh, that's a problem. And I go talk to the teacher, and this is what we did, the principal and director of elementary ed. And then at that point, we're like, all right, we need to separate these kids. It's not working. And we need to bring these parents in. We need to do a thing. And they still might come to the board, because now when they were out at Walmart, that kid found their kid, targeted him in the toy section. Now they're getting hit in the public too. You know, that is a hypothetical, but not uncommon for things to progress through the lowest level.
Right.
And then they might write it down as a formal complaint. And it's like, listen, we did everything we could do within our control. We just can't affect Walmart at this point. Like, that's outside of our scope, you know, and so sorry about that, but, you know, we feel like we've put in the protections necessary, and we've resolved it and effectively handled it from our perspective. Parents still upset because their kid's getting hit, and I understand why.
Trevor, do you want to open up the monitoring report for OE3 that we looked at last, just so you can see how that one was handled?
I would love to open that up.
So if you open board docs,
Yeah, I'm in there, so I'm looking at the policies.
and then you do the little search icon and type in
Yeah.
OE3,
Ah,
it'll pull up the,
February one or February,
so what's been
Okay.
helpful for me sometimes when I have questions about policies or indicators, or how do I have a thing that I want addressed. How do I do it? When and where, what's the process, right? Is I'll go back into these past monitoring reports and try to see what was it before.
okay.
That was helpful the first year I was on the board, because I didn't have the history of like seeing when things were brought up. And it might be helpful now just in interpreting that statement. I'm just trying to pull up an OE3.
February 6 and 23. So if you scroll, if you get out of search, and if you just go back to meetings,
So there's multiple ways to do this,
Yeah.
yeah,
meetings, and then February
Let me show
6.
you
Board
how to do
docs
that.
unfortunately doesn't have a very good search.
I'd like to
Those
write a
are the
policy
committee
about
that
board
was-
docs. February
February
6th,
6th.
23, yeah. Right.
Is it the national conference when we
Right.
have them just stop by and who's telling them what it is to do?
Does this and it does this and it does.
Like, you just must be inside, isn't it?
I really like it.
OE3,
Once you figure it out,
okay.
board docs.
And way to go being in compliance as well. Okay, so you've got your interpretation of the values, you've got the definition, protect confidential, FERPA, that's the first one. Effectively shall mean having a process to resolve complaints in a timely manner, ensuring that all parties involved are active participants or resolved as determined by board policy. Okay, so that resolves my initial concern, that term in particular has been expressly interpreted, and we could look at that and say, do we want just the process to be good, or do we want resolution with a particular sort of bias even, right? Which I don't think we want. I think this is what we want, is a transparent, active process that people can be assured is fair and accessible to them, and that's frankly the best I think any institution can do. Right? Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so those, I think those definitions are helpful. I don't know how much we need to interpret those things. Like, I understand to a certain extent, like, why it could be there to kind of like elaborate on that a little bit more. For something like effectively handle complaints, I think we could just define effectively and what a complaint is, and we've probably done what we need to do there. And so those interpretations, I think, whatever, they're fine.
Right.
It's really the indicators and those definition of terms. And to your point, like, effectively is really great. What the heck does that mean?
Mm-hmm.
You know, so here we've defined effectively so that the board knows, like, this is our interpretation. Yours is like a value. Here's like how we're going to interpret that. And then the specific things we're going to do are, hey, it's made available, it's accessible. You know, that's indicator 1. And then indicator 2 is when we get one, we've actually followed through and investigated it.
Right. And so looking at the indicators for this one in particular, I think that this is good. Indicator 1, the formal complaint process is made available to the public and communicated to complainants when a formal complaint is made. Although that should probably say even when an informal complaint is made, right? That they're told, well, thanks for bringing this to my attention. If you want to file a formal complaint, this is what you need to do, right? Because at that point, they're not making a formal complaint. They're complaining, right? So that's good as far as it is. And then there are these, and the policy is stated, and then there are these additional avenues for people to go in. So there's lots of ways for it to actually come to official attention. That's important in itself. The second one I think is extremely important though. 100% of formal written complaints are investigated and resolved. The investigation and resolution. Whether resolution doesn't speak to whether it's satisfactory to all parties involved or not, but that it has been investigated and addressed insofar as is within the district's power, right? So that makes, I think, a lot more sense for how, at the level of the language of the policy, that I don't want to say ambiguity necessarily. It is ambiguity, though. It's the possibility for multiple interpretations, right, exists, so that when you are creating your indicators, you can speak to the higher level language here: respect, dignity, and courtesy. And I mean, I would even probably add into that, you know, transparency and accessibility, which you've embedded in at the level of the indicators. So maybe we don't need, as long as it's there, we don't need to rewrite it as policy at that point. And that's something we've talked about several times.
And I would think, like, when something goes from, like, we're seeing it in an indicator, or maybe we're asking for it, but it's not coming through in the evidence in the indicator, then we want to say explicitly, like, mental health is a big concern in the community. We value some statement related to mental health. We have indicators now that are bringing that information forward. We've had indicators that bring that information forward.
Right.
But if it was not to the level, if the information was not to the level that we want to feel satisfied that it's being addressed, we could explicitly put it in policy, and that forces the district to take specific action on that.
Right.
And even if it is, but we feel it's so strong to us, we never want it to get lost, we could still put it in policy.
Yeah, as an expression of our values, right? This is something that is part of the cultural conversation in a huge way right now. We want to enshrine that in policy. That's
Exactly.
right. For exactly the reason that I talked about, insulating from over hasty change, right? Having the reason to really put that language, you know, down in digital stone, right, is the other half of that. So,
Well, and I think, you know, effectively handle complaints is a good one where, like, it's hard for the board to feel confident that things, like, because you hear complaints, you know, and like, what is a formal complaint? We had somebody in the last year come to the board and complain at open comment. And, you know,
that person had gone through some of the layers of support to help get that addressed, but not all of them. And so ultimately, like, I met with them after that meeting, and I explained what the process was to resolve the issue. And it was recently resolved against our preferences as a school district in favor of the parent and their personal preferences, which is fine, right? We're in agreement that that's like an acceptable outcome because that process worked. Like, we would prefer a different outcome. They got what they wanted, and that's okay, you know. So, like, I think that disposition, you know, is important. It's not always that the school district's, you know, preferred outcome is the one that we end up at. It's a thoughtful process that considers like the broader ramifications of this, and do we want this to be an ongoing issue? Is it really worth, you know, where this could go if there's a lawsuit or there's ongoing mediation? You know, there's lots of different things that get involved in there, and so I think beneath many of these like value statements of the board, it's hard to capture all of that in a few indicators and some evidence, and you know, it does require some trust at some level, and I know the board has that, and when you ask for information, we give it, you know, so that is one of those things where you're right, it's really like what is effectively handle complaints, and hopefully in our monitoring report, the board gets satisfaction that we have defined that to your satisfaction through those definitions, and we're providing evidence that makes you feel comfortable.
Right.
And where there's other things, and you had a question, well, okay, so you said you handled that effectively, but we just had somebody at the board last month.
Right.
Like, that wasn't a formal complaint? We should be able to explain, you know, at that time, like, yeah, it wasn't a formal complaint. They had one more avenue to go, and it was resolved in their satisfaction. But I could see that for any one of these
Yeah.
these policies. Protect confidential information. Somebody told me that a teacher shared their grades with a grandma. That's not in their contact list. All right, well, here's the deal. They were disciplined. That was unacceptable. You know.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks for talking through that particular situation with me, so, yeah.
Well, and the indicators, even though we can't correct them,
Right.
that's why
We respond to them.
we can.
Yeah. Right.
And we can say, no.
No.
And I could even frame it a little differently. Like, you tell us to do the homework and bring back something you can approve.
Right.
Right? Like, it's not the board's job to like get into those weeds. It's our job to present you something that's acceptable to the board. And if we're not doing our homework right, well, you tell us to go back and make corrections.
It's like a rubric.
Yeah.
Say what
Exactly.
we want.
it is, Right.
You do the homework and bring it back.
Right.
Give you A.
Exactly.
We're making progress.
Yeah. And to Jeff's point earlier, then does the rubric actually get us what we care about, or does it show us a bunch of other stuff? Right?
And you're allowed to say, this data doesn't prove this indicator true.
Makes
Right.
sense. Just, I was laughing at the word rubric because it's a word I've never heard of until I was playing sports.
Same here.
Rubrics.
Same
Rubric?
here.
They're so
Really?
common.
I
I
remember when
forget,
first
not
joined the
everybody
board.
is a teacher.
I was gonna say, it's like,
That is a term the public does not
Yeah,
use.
yeah.
that's why I use the word academic.
About a
It's a very
marketing guy.
academic environment. It's a, you know, simple layman.
And it'll
So-
remain so if I have anything to say.
We had a monitoring report many years ago, and the term rubric came up, and one of the board members said, I don't even know what that word means.
Mhm.
Well, it's just an
That's funny.
evaluation matrix.
There we go.
Yeah. We could talk about key performance indicators. That's a business term, right?
KPIs.
Yeah, KPIs.
That's a language I understand.
All right, so
Well, yeah.
are there any other policies that board members felt like we should look at and wordsmith? Let's focus on the OEs. And I think that the first several,
So we're going through this, we're doing this?
we don't have to, but we can. But if we don't, so Jeff, like, if we don't want to do it tonight, I don't want to meet next time. We will cancel that.
No, I agree.
You know what I mean? Like, if there isn't a desire here, we will not come in another time.
Right.
And we will just
The whole
put this to
challenge of
bed.
putting these two together,
Yeah.
like, you know,
Because there was a desire from the board to do this.
But we're a minority of the board.
right.
Well, we don't have to do any specific changes, but if there are specific policies that were a pin in your side that you wanted to address with the board, this would be an opportunity to do it.
Right.
If anything came up tonight that we wanted to do, maybe we could still hold that workshop.
We
I would
can
hope
roll
that
it
there would be a
forward.
majority present, or we could just put it in a meeting as
Right.
an information item that becomes a action item.
Yeah, because this is otherwise just an opportunity for us to raise those questions, see
Mhm.
where everybody stands, or at least this group of people stand around it, and if it's something that needs to go forward and try to get in front of a quorum at least, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
And I would argue there's a ongoing process every month when an OE comes up to revisit it. And if the board says, at this time, this policy doesn't meet our needs, we only realize this after going through this monitoring report, but there's a value that's missing here. 2 meetings of the board and that's added into the policy. It's too easy.
Yeah.
You know, so this is a great time to like collectively just kind of workshop it and talk it, but every month there's an opportunity to look at those policies and add something when you've been able to dive into the weeds of what it actually means.
Right.
You know,
And
so
that's
there's-
why I asked the question. Is the process as we go through this, we're actively asking that question, or we should be as we go through
right.
Mhm.
each monitoring report we get.
Yeah.
That's why I asked the question.
Yeah, and we, since I've been on the board, since it was new, we weren't like intentionally reviewing the policies after monitoring them. Because it was new and we felt satisfied that that had been done recently. It can be part of the process now, where I ask that question. Do we like what it's doing? People can say yes or no, and then if they say no, they better have a alternative, because I don't want to spend another hour wordsmithing a policy.
If that's what we do. I mean, our meetings can go like 6 hours, and so.
We have to
Right
vote. After 9, we have to vote on that.
And I would say that, you know, from an administrative lens, there's 1 or 2 things in here I would be curious if the board wants to continue in that exact way. You know, one of the things that we've struggled with, which I like but is tough, is like practice good stewardship towards the environment. You know, and we talked about that one already, right? But like, from an administrative perspective, trying to prove that value to the school board is a challenge. That word practice is tough. We could demonstrate that we have taught it, and, you know, the board could be satisfied with that, but that's not what the board's asking. They want us to demonstrate evidence that students are practicing that. And that's an area where, is the board, like, we require practice, or is it enough that we have, like, educated our students on this topic? You know, and so that's an area where, as administration, like, we just kind of struggle with that one, to provide good evidence to the school board. And if it's not a need for the school board to say that, then we would be totally open to like changing that verb.
I remember that discussion, and that was exactly what Dr. Lucky was talking about, that like measuring that is tough, right?
So that gets to flapping wings versus outcomes. Like, we
Right.
can say like, hey, we teach it in all these different places, and we know that kids have it, and on these 2 test questions on a state test, they demonstrate proficiency.
Right.
But you said practice. Okay, well, that's a harder thing to
Right.
measure, to quantify, given the busy lives of teachers and the
Right.
varied nature of how it's executed from 4K through 12, you know.
Can you show us the relative weights of recycling weight versus landfill waste, right? Like,
I just felt like that when we went through that report, felt like it was putting an extra onus on our frontline teachers and staff. Because they were the ones
To report
documenting,
it.
they were the ones
Mhm.
doing a lot of the ad hoc things that were making it onto that report, which I felt like just added extra, some of them are, you know, they want to do that, but do we have to have them document it and remember it?
right. Well, I
Go dig
asked
that
that
out for-
question.
correct.
and
I just
even
felt
in the
that was
moment,
really
I was like,
cumbersome.
oh, wait, but that's asking teachers to do more work.
Correct.
Right.
There's plenty of things where as administrators or administrative assistants, we can, you know, gather that data for teachers or skim things or
Yeah.
curate. There are some things for which it takes a teacher on a daily basis to take notes. Like, we're not in the classroom witnessing all these things. They have to let us know. You know, and if it's an interruption of their work, that's something to consider. It may very well be worth it. There's lots of things they need to take notes on, you know.
in other cases, maybe the board doesn't want that, and there's a different way to feel satisfied that our environment will be protected in the future and that our kids understand what that means. So I would just say, like, as we go through this process over this next year, we're happy to, highlight where we think the policy could be reconsidered, and always happy to provide suggestions for change. At the end of the day, though, it is the board's values, the community's values, not the administration's, and so that's the board's onus to change those things.
Have you been doing that in the past? Have you been bringing feedback to, hey, this was tough for us, and that was like, on that example, for these reasons? And
I
telling
think-
the board that,
yeah.
and explicitly saying that this is something we would like to review, is to maybe just, that's a pretty easy wording change.
I think we have. We've
Okay.
also understood that we do kind of need to do it for a couple of years to know if, and just because it's hard for us doesn't mean it's not worth doing. So we don't want to just like, oh gosh, this one's really hard, guys. Can we change this verb? If
We
it
can
is
still
the
say
board.
no.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. If it's the board's value, then it's our own, like, protect confidential information. Don't sometimes protect it, no, always, right? So I think we wanted to just get through these few years and really see if this works and if we can make it work, because I think it's worth doing. And they are a reflection of what was here before under policy governance. We're just adding some more reporting to it. And so I think at this point, 3 years in, I think we would start to feel comfortable saying, this one's really tough, and it's I don't know that it needs to be this tough. There's a handful of things in here, editorial things, not gross change. And we
That
can
would be
highlight
interesting
those.
to hear more of, though. I totally agree with that approach, yeah.
Yeah, because that's what I think, as professionals, that's what we want to hear, at least I do.
Mhm.
And we can always say, hey, no, we still think that this might put onus on some group, but we
Right.
feel like it's still, we would still like to see that. But at the same time, we also don't want to we don't want to just have extra burden and bureaucracy for the
Absolutely.
results are going to be similar.
So I think this next year is a good opportunity, a school year, for us as administration to probably bring those things forward as the board is like more conscientious about policy at this time.
One of the concerns I have, and it's from, I haven't found this in any of the current policies, and I don't, maybe this shouldn't be in this one, maybe it should be in the OE about facilities, but under OE 8, communicating support for the board, those are pretty similar to what we had in the past. But in the past, we had a 14, 15, and 16, and I made sure that I wasn't missing them, that they weren't on another page, they aren't there. Because 14 was failed, well, this is written in the negative way, so the superintendent will ensure the board shall make the final selection when naming buildings, facilities, and real property. 15 was the, ensure the board, that board approval is secured prior to closing facilities. That's been done, but it's not in our policies. And 16 is ensure the board, that board approval is secured prior to implementing any enrollment management plan as it pertains to district-wide boundary changes. And I know when Lincoln was closed, the boundary changes, I understood, were approved by this board. But I do think it should be in policy that naming facilities should be with the board.
I think that
Closing.
is.
It's in OE 12 now.
Yeah.
Is it?
So
Yeah.
it was,
I
it
looked-
might
It
have
was
just been
moved
moved
maybe,
from
but
OE
yeah.
8, the old OE 8
And the
to OE
superintendent
12.
cannot build,
Yep.
renovate, or close.
That's number 4 here, or excuse me, no,
Okay,
So, yeah,
Okay, naming
OE
the buildings.
12.5 is naming.
yeah.
where's
that-
the one on boundary changes? Maybe that's.
That might not be in there.
That one I haven't seen, but I've seen the other two.
The
They're both
boundary
12.
changes, I think, would probably be
It's
something.
an administrative policy.
So we delegated it down, we as a
But
board.
as a board, do we value saying we would make that final decision?
It was taken out of a board policy as like a value, but in our administrative policy, it indicates it's the board's responsibility.
Can
which
you
is
find
interesting.
that for
Then,
us?
Absolutely.
then we should.
We should put it back, yeah.
Yeah.
There is in OE11, the superintendent will periodically review and present for the board any school attendance boundary changes to ensure reasonable balance in student enrollment.
There.
Can you repeat that
Present
again?
for board approval.
It's in OE11.
Number
point
13.
13.
Yep.
13.
Says that the board has to approve any
Yep.
boundary changes.
Okay, and so the administrative side of that policy should reflect that the process filters back up to us, right? As I presume it does.
And it sounds like it does.
Okay.
There was a EL, former now OE, on instructional materials. I didn't see, I don't have strong feelings about that one. The district calendar, but there were on co-curricular program, and again, if it's somewhere else, please tell me. I thought I looked through all of these, but that the co-curricular program is intended to enrich student learning and development through activities which foster emotional, intellectual, and physical growth, ensure programs avoid gender, ethnic, socioeconomic, cultural bias, ensure programs include opportunity for students to develop talents.
I'm sorry, Deb, this is from
This is an
policy?
old one, this
That's
is
the
an old one that we
All
used
right.
to have. We looked at this one a lot, and we ended up having some really rich conversations about involvement of particular representation of students from free and reduced families participating in co-curricular, and we as a board had some really rich conversations about what can we do to encourage, because there's so much, like there's fees and uniforms and cleats, and so how do we, and the kids aren't working, so then they're losing money because they're participating, but we want to encourage that. So we had some really good conversations around that. I don't know if we need that again, but just a thought. And then we had one we created, and I could argue for or against it, but we got really involved in legislative activity, and we really struggled with what is the board's legislative activity advocacy versus the superintendent's. And so it was the EL17, the superintendent shall not fail to advocate on behalf of public education in the school district of La Crosse and provide accurate information to local legislators as well as our state and federal legislators when appropriate. But those were some other ones. I just wanted to bring those up for discussion, but I did, the boundary one, I'm glad we found that one because that one was a concern to me. And I do miss the co-curricular one.
We're definitely getting data for co-curriculars, I know that much. Like, we've seen a couple monitoring
Yeah.
reports with a lot of, they're linking, of course, engagement and success rates to co-curriculars, but it would be interesting to see, because again, kind of the conversation we started with, co-curricular, whether it's arts or clubs or sports.
It was all.
The community, it's something easily and tangible the community can understand and they want to be engaged in. And I don't know how much we're engaging, and again, I don't know if that's our position in place, but as far as like, how do we make us better and the most competitive, because it goes back to we are the best place to be.
Mhm.
And I think we are, it just comes down to are we monitoring that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think in terms of
Concisely.
like, Troy, you'd be able to, somewhere in OE 10, we're talking about participation in things, and then as a part of our redefining ready report, we include that as an indicator of whether or not students are ready if they're in 2 or more activities.
Mm-hmm.
So that's involved there. It doesn't get into like the weeds about like support, expanding that.
Oh, it's from OE 10.1, maintaining a climate that is characterized by support and encouragement for high student success. And Dr. Lahacki's whole presentation on high success indicators was around 2 or more co-curriculars being, so it's embedded in there. But I think what you're saying is that's a pretty roundabout way of getting to it. Yeah.
We
If that
also
was
have-
one of those things that we were monitoring for it, to
So
thought.
OE11 also says, so OE10 and OE11 I feel like are, to me, like the most important OEs. Finances obviously are. But thinking about like students and academic success, that's where we find student stuff, OE10 and 11.
Mhm.
And OE11, number...
It's more focused on classroom instruction, though.
Number 5 says ensure that instructional program includes opportunities for students to develop talents and interests in their specialized areas of interest.
Does that language cover co-curriculars? Sorry to jump in.
I would have to look at the monitoring report to see if the indicators ever included anything like that. No.
Again, if we feel these are really important, we can add that language whether or not it's in an indicator or not.
Mhm.
If the majority of the board feels that way.
Yeah, if it arises to the level of a value that reflects our community's interest, easy enough to add. We're already reporting a lot of this information. It would be collected in one spot, and maybe
Agreed.
easier for our public to identify as satisfactory than if it was an explicit statement as opposed to embedded in something else.
I think most community members, especially even community members that don't have kids in school anymore, like, or never had kids in school, that whether it's arts or co-curriculars or sports, they're going to want to have something that's pretty explicit.
Yeah,
So
I
then
agree.
they-
I do.
Yeah.
You know, what does that, policy statement say? I mean, it could be provide a range of
Yeah.
extracurricular and co-curricular opportunities for students to explore their interests. You could be more explicit about these are not like academic academies and gifted and talented programs. These are things that extend the day and allow them to explore things that are non-curricular in nature. That's not a hard statement to add and
Right.
quickly monitor within the realm of what we already do.
We have the data, just
So I think if there's like an idea for a new policy, a good way to approach writing it is like the backwards design idea of like, what's the data we want to see? So like, what's the outcome?
Yeah.
And
How do you
then
ask the question
how did we
to
get
get what you
there?
want?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That way we can be sure that we're getting what we want even before we talk about indicators or anything like that.
Well, yeah, no, I was going to suggest that we just socialize it across the broader group, of course, if this is something that all of our peers that are here tonight.
So I guess with ideas like that, do we really want to meet again?
No?
Do we want to just have it come up the next time we deal with OE 11 or OE 10? We can
So
propose.
the question is, can we accomplish what we're talking about here in the regular course
Just
of
in
our
the
work
cycle,
plan?
yeah.
Right, because this isn't something that is necessarily like urgent. It's not
Right.
it's not a crisis moment that we're responding to. It's a desire that we want to see acted on, that we admittedly amongst us, even if we support the idea, don't have the language fleshed out to just plop in there yet,
Mhm.
right?
We have the language from the old one. Again, I don't believe
Right.
that's 100% what this board would want, but I think it's sometimes better to react to something than a blank page.
Yeah, having a model to work from and then to ask questions, but I think the backward design principle is good, and that's what's always difficult about academic research is finding how do you ask the right questions, right? And that's what we're after. So we don't even need to think about the level of indicators. That's not our job. That's your job, right? We want to write the words the first time in such a way that we know we're going to get the indicators that we're interested in seeing. So if we want to see, sorry, we're talking about like sports and music and art programs right now. We want to see specific data about these programs. Well, there's lots of kinds of things. It could be participation numbers, number of elective credits chosen in the case of like band or things like that, hours of lessons given at the elementary level, things like that. There's lots of data to think about.
How many championships we won?
How many, if people really care about that, it's a point of pride for districts.
It
There's
is.
a ton of research that shows investment in sports actually, benefits
or arts
this
or
everything.
music,
Yeah.
it doesn't matter.
Right, so it's-
you're producing.
But what we should write is our values. What do
Yes.
we
Right.
value?
No,
Do we
right.
value-
This is the thing. Yes.
Do we value championships? Do we value equitability and participation? What do we value?
Participation and equity.
Participation
That's-
and equity of access is what I value in terms
Agreed.
of co-curriculars.
I would say that if when we check out OE 11 next, this continues to be a focus of the board, given the notes that I've written down, we'll have some suggestions
When will
for
that be?
OE 11 September.
Coming right up. Great.
So if it
Great
arises
timing.
as an interest, we'll have some
Were you going on
recommended
vacation?
language and
Pardon?
indicators ready.
on vacation in September? I hate for you to miss that. I thought last time you might have mentioned something about that. I might be wrong.
September's good. I'm
So
missing
what
an
dates are
October
we
meeting,
meeting in
so-
September?
The 11th and 18th.
You're stuck
'Cause we
with me
missed
for
the
both
fourth.
of them.
Okay.
So the process would be, we look back.
Yep.
Next meeting, meeting number 2, we approve that one,
Mhm.
and then we look forward. When we're looking forward is where we would change the policy.
Correct.
And if,
So,
And that requires 2 readings.
and it would be
Yes.
a motion to amend, and then you would read the
because
policy
first,
that you wrote, and everybody would have a chance to think about it and talk about it and make changes.
because first, it's, the first meeting, it's coming up in an informational agenda item, not on the consent agenda,
Yes.
right? And it's not marked for action at that point.
Right.
Correct.
Then the next meeting, we would approve the previous
So
look back.
when in that process do we make a motion? Let's say we have the language perfect, right?
Second meeting.
When, what, sorry?
Second meeting. So when we would be approving the previous years, then we would be making the motion.
But we have to start the process in the first meeting, and my question is, because it's an information item, there's no action being
Mhm.
taken, when do we even bring up, hey, I've got this language that,
I'm
We
not
kind
gonna
of-
be a big jerk about.
You should be a big
when
jerk.
you're allowed to talk about things. But first meeting, we're looking back. It's an information item, no
Okay.
action. Second meeting, it's a matter reserved for board action, we approve.
oh, here's
And
where
then
my.
we also get an information item when we look forward.
Right,
It would be in that information item where we can talk about the policy changes, I guess. Then, I'm guessing
So
it'd be
it's-
the next meeting where we would probably put it in consent agenda. We could take it out as a
Right.
matter reserved for board action, approve it, and then approve
right.
it again.
Okay, so it's,
Make it-
it's the first meeting, second meeting thing, which is because the first meeting is actually not even the first meeting. It's meeting 0, where we're just hearing about what's already been done.
Mhm.
The second time we're looking at OE 11 is the second meeting is our first proposed change meeting.
It's the first meeting of action.
The first meeting of action, there is a way to say it, thank you, yeah. First meeting of action, and then we have to go through the process of removing that from the consent agenda.
I'll just put as
We'll
a
just-
matter.
I mean, we'll know it's coming,
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
But
there's,
like, yeah.
if you know it's coming, you just put it on action.
Right, I mean, but, so that, and this just doesn't happen in this day and age, but let's say, Jeff, in that the first meeting of action, holds forth and convinces all of us in the moment that some change is needed, that we haven't talked about like this previously.
Mhm.
And then in the second meeting, we would have to bring it up, removing it from the consent agenda, to open it for discussion, to act on.
Yeah, I think
Jeff's.
because the agenda doesn't say it's an action item, we can't do an action on it. Is that correct?
That's
We
correct.
wouldn't be able to
By-
vote on
By
anything.
Robert's rules.
That's
Yeah,
our
open meeting.
practice. As long as things are duly noted, you can always take action on them. We have said we're not going to because it's in information, and so it's best practice not to. At the end of the day, the board can do what they want as long as they've told the public we're gonna talk about it. And so,
But if we say information only,
yep, we shouldn't
we
act on
could run
shoots.
into an issue with open meeting law.
People would wonder what's going on. You said you weren't gonna act on it, and then you did. Yep.
Like I said, I'm not gonna be a jerk about it and be like, you lost your opportunity, we're moving on. I haven't done that yet, so probably
Yeah,
isn't
the
gonna happen.
time's
anymore.
coming. You just-
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
Wear me
so,
down
okay.
enough.
And the two meeting thing is simply to uphold the importance of policy changes and let the public know, like, hey, we're talking about a policy.
But
could
it is a
change.
matter of our bylaws. So if we're following our own rules,
Yep.
in the first meeting of action is when we
Vote on the information.
vote on the information.
Yeah.
Right.
Previous years.
Yeah, the previous year's information, and I'm sorry, I was in a new employee orientation all day. I am absolutely fried, so I'm not thinking clearly about this. And in that following meeting, after the first meeting of action, we have to remove an item from the consent agenda, because otherwise it is just, as a matter of course, it is getting approved, we're not changing anything. That's our opportunity to change it.
So we haven't put them in the consent agenda lately to be more clear to board members that we're like doing this now. We're voting on this one.
Okay.
Because there was
Why?
concern, Deb, you shared concern about
Right.
that. We wanted it to be really explicit to everybody watching and all board members present that we're doing the thing, we voted.
Right.
So,
So
now
it's a-
that we're
It's
gonna.
a series of 4 meetings. The first meeting is
Right.
the discussion of the look back. The second meeting is the voting on the look back and discussion of forward. The third meeting would be a draft or a proposed policy change that would be an action, voted up or down. That would be vote no, because it has to take two, we have to have, it has to be first reading, second reading. So that'd be the first reading. Then the fourth meeting, we would have the second reading. And then it would become policy.
Yes, thank you. That seems right.
Yep.
Bureaucracy.
I love it.
That's why I think
Do you want a
this is
flow chart?
unnecessarily
You love to hate it. No,
complicated.
no, I'll be.
It's complicated.
I just drew the flow
but
chart.
the-
There it is.
But it
Ribbons
is-
all over it.
The
Yes, there we
complication
go.
is
Thank you.
important so that we don't jerk all the staff around and force them to make
Was there
changes.
stick figures involved too?
constantly.
It's quick handwriting, it's much
Okay.
better in normal practice.
Okay.
It's
good,
not
sorry.
better, I
Thank
tried.
you- Thank you for humoring
I need
me on
occupational
the
therapy for my
procedures
handwriting.
of
I
it
have
all.
horrible handwriting.
Okay,
So can I share a sample then of, like, how,
Would you share the old language as a model, just so I can think about it for a month?
All of the old ELs are still in board docs.
In the
If you
library.
go under, you have to be
was
logged
it under?
in to board docs.
EL 16?
Not in
16.
public view, but then you can go under policies, there's that drop down. And then you can look at retired, and all of the old policy governance policies live in.
Which one is it? EL
16.
16, thank you. All right, I haven't reviewed all these old ones.
Do you want to just take a picture of it?
I got it right here now, thanks.
you said policy, oh, there it is.
There's a little drop down.
Yep.
Okay, and the
EL
one,
16,
the one
which
that
one
you're
is it?
interested in
Co-curricular.
Most of it.
is the whole language of it. The superintendent shall not fail to
Because
ensure.
we used to repeat, the way it was written in the olden days was, it was this double negative.
Yeah,
shall
the
not
negative
fail.
construction.
Yeah.
So that's the thing we would have to consider rewriting. How are we going to express this in both terms of positive action and prohibitions, right? Because most of our policies take that form of shall and shall not.
But
or will.
also, when you propose a new policy, let's promise to make sure it's not somewhere else. So we're not asking the district to go twice to prove something. And
Right.
that's just board member work, just to make sure like,
Right, our due diligence.
we want it to be this thing, so dig through all the policies we have, make sure that we're not like double dipping and making this,
Right.
overly complicated for
to-
our overly complicated process.
Yeah, and I absolutely agree with that, but to that point, in this particular discussion of co-curricular programs, that language, upon first review anyway, so far, does not appear in our current OE policies. But we are getting reported on that through the various indicators because the
Links to-
administration's interpretations have put co-curriculars in there as valuable parts of what we're doing in the learning environment and instructional program OEs, 10 and 11.
It's also in results too. Dr. Wahara just presented on that in
Right.
June in R 3.2.
And I think when you're, like a good practice just for all future policy stuff is like, you're having to convince the rest of the board of your proposed changes. And there could be a board member present who's like, I don't want to see any changes, and like you have to prove to them that this isn't repeated somewhere else, we're not receiving this information and it's important.
Right.
So like frame that proposal and the discussion in those terms of like, this is a value expressed by our community, we're not receiving the information, I combed through all the things, we don't even get it as an indicator, here's why I'm proposing it.
Well,
That
but
way,
in this case, the question is not that we're not receiving it as an indicator, but that it is a value of ourselves as board and of the community that is not explicitly addressed in policy. We would like to emphasize those indicators in a different place. Which, if that's why we want to do it, we have to convince people that's a good enough reason, these people, to do that, right? In the case where there's something we really are not getting an indicator, right? That's the more drastic version of what we're talking about, right?
yeah.
Okay.
I mean, it's there's room for that in OE 11 somewhere to have a statement the superintendent will and address co-curricular stuff. You know, I think that's too easy to add, personally.
So we are not gonna meet the next time.
I couldn't make it anyway, so it's fine.
My wife will be really
Well,
happy.
I'm concerned if we, by not meeting a second time, that those who were not in attendance, if they have any concerns on policy, when do they get the chance to share that?
So we will have the opportunity after looking at the monitoring reports. I can add in a script of like, and we can build it into the agenda, so it's intentional. Something like what happened in policy governance, where it was like, this is the policy, do we believe that it's working the way we need it to, or do board members want to propose changes or something like that?
Because
That way, anybody present would be able to say their piece.
and are the others going to get like a debriefing on this discussion? I mean, I know it's public, obviously.
They'll be able to watch,
Okay.
and
the
I will
burden
be
is on-
available for questions.
Okay.
But I also think, in terms of people's schedules, we just need to be mindful that, you know, folks have full lives and they make what they can, and if they can't, then they'll be responsible to ask for that information if they need it. And of course, for Scott, we will share it because he is unable. Okay, we will not meet again. I mean, we will meet again.
Until the 11th.
I was gonna say, ever?
Like twice a month for
Until the
ever.
11th and then the 18th. So 2 consecutive weeks though, which is nice.
So only
Clear.
11th and 18th, no 26th.
Okay.
And so in these next board meetings, when there is that opportunity, it'll be like a practice round where I'm saying the awkward thing about like, okay, we talked about the opportunity to look at the policy. Do board members feel like the policy is meeting its needs? We won't be voting on anything specific, but it will just trigger for the next agenda if something needs to. Does that make sense, Laura? Do you think for a process in our agenda?
I think so, yes. I want to make sure we're very clear on changes to the policy language versus changes to the monitoring report itself, so the interpretations and indicators. Because we look at that at the subsequent meetings.
So would you prefer that after we've approved the indicators for the next year, that it's very clear at that point, we're like, okay, now we're looking at the policy only?
It's just 2 agenda items. Like, one's the monitoring indicator. Well, I think look at the policy first, frankly. Like, is this policy still working for us? If it
And then
is,
to the
all right, well, are these indicators still working for us? If the board wants to add a policy piece, well, then it's naturally gonna change the monitoring report and the indicators for the following year. And so first address the policy, then we'll address the monitoring report, do them back to back in the same agenda. You know, within a month, we'll have them ready, and we'll have 11 months to generate the information needed by the board.
And that's ultimately how it's built in when the board does the monitoring vote. The recommended language is to approve the report as presented, and is it achieving the board's intent of the policy? So that's written in the motion, the recommended motion. Currently.
So then, if there is a policy change, because the motions get read fast.
Yep, so somebody could make a motion that, yep, it's achieving here, I can pull up an example, just so I'm not saying it directly from memory.
Or approve the report as
It's
presented,
taking 8 years to
but
make.
I propose the following changes to the policy, or something like that.
Maybe not. Board Docs is not my friend today.
That's crazy.
Okay, so like OE8, for example, in regard to the monitoring report, OE8, and with the respect to the provisions of policy BSR 5, superintendent accountability, the Board of Education concludes that the superintendent and district are in compliance. So it's saying, and with respect to the provisions of superintendent accountability, so if that makes sense. Maybe not.
Was the, okay.
Achieving its, normally there is language about that it's achieving its intent. Maybe
think
I
it's
didn't
just
pick a
a-
good example.
There's just an agenda item
I
where we
think-
just ask.
Yeah, I think that's.
And then someone
the
could make
clearer way
a
to do it.
motion that
I wouldn't-
recommend these policy
I
language
wouldn't blend
changes.
it.
No, I would just explicitly ask, because then it's very clear to
So
us
if
and the
a
public.
board member has proposed policy changes, I know at the city, there'll be like a paper submitted, and then they will all see on their screens or something, like the language that they're adding to whatever they call their stuff, ordinances or whatever. That would be helpful, I think, rather than just rattling off some words, because in all of the stuff and recording and for clarity of what board members are voting on, if you have a policy recommendation change, type it up, print it out,
Yeah.
maybe send it to Laura ahead of time so that it can be distributed, presented to online viewers, and then board members will know
Right.
what that is.
I feel like a lot of what we've ended up doing is opening up discussions about how we're all feeling about some matter or another, but not having any like particular argument for a change to be made. So like that's on us. If I want to see a policy changed, I need to think 4 meetings in advance, right? Or do the homework of checking those policies, making sure that it's not covered anywhere. And if I find that thing, right, I need to write it up the way I think it should be. I need to bring that before my peers, argue why I think it's valuable, hope you all come on board with me, and we go through this process. But I need to bring you the work done.
Yes.
Okay.
I think if there was like robust and wild discussion about the policy and we couldn't resolve it in a meeting, maybe we would have a workshop on that one thing,
Right.
and then we'd take action in the meetings following.
Right.
But I can't imagine,
Right, because frankly, that's where wordsmithing would happen. If I bring a policy and Jeff says, actually, I don't think that that's asking for what we want, we should write it this way. We can talk about the relative merits of shall or will or whatever the sticking point is, right? We may or may not resolve that in that discussion. And if we do and it passes, great. Or we resolve it and it still doesn't pass, also great. That was the process. But that's the thing is bringing the homework, right?
Yeah, and you'll have looked at the policy as a result of reviewing the monitoring report and an informational item, and then in 2 weeks, you'll be approving or not approving the monitoring report. That'll be the notice to be like, hey, I just read through this whole policy, do I have any changes? And we can make that a formal part of, hey, next meeting, remember, bring any policy changes in advance. Ideally, get them to Laura by Thursday, so when we post the agenda, it's ready to go. At the latest, let's Laura know before the meeting so that we can get it up visually for people to look at, and
Right.
then, so there'll be a process to like notify board members, like, hey, next month or next meeting, get any policy changes you think of together. So it shouldn't come as a surprise to anyone or.
Yeah.
sound good?
That's great. And no meeting on the 26th.
No workshop, yeah, no
Okay.
additional workshop on this.
We are done.
And we don't even adjourn.
We are adjourned.